The restaurant was buzzing that evening, dim lighting cast a warm glow, soft jazz hummed in the background, and the rich aroma of garlic and sizzling steak filled the air. It was the perfect setting for a family dinner. The perfect setting for a catastrophe. I sat at the head of the table, my parents to my left, while Rachel sat directly across from me. Beside her, Chloe kicked her little legs back and forth under her chair. Rachel's family was there too, her mother, her sister, and her sister's husband. The conversation ebbed and flowed, laughter rippling through the air, but I barely processed any of it. My attention was locked onto the wine, or more specifically, the fact that Rachel wasn't drinking any. She always had a glass with dinner. Always. But when the waiter stopped by with the house red, she simply placed a hand over her glass and shook her head with a tight, polite smile. My stomach clenched, and my mouth suddenly felt dry. She wasn't pregnant, I knew that much. We hadn't been intimate in weeks. Her decision, not mine. So what was it? Some kind of health issue? Or was she hiding something? I leaned back, studying her closely. Something was off. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe I was finally noticing what had been there all along, but she looked different. Her skin seemed paler than usual, almost drained. Exhausted. Like she was. And then, like a slap to the face, the answer hit me. I nearly laughed out loud. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled, a slow, knowing smile, picked up my own wine glass, and tapped my fork against the rim. To family, I said, lifting it. And to honesty. A few confused glances. Some murmurs. Rachel's eyes snapped to mine, something flickering behind them, panic, fear. Good. No wine for you tonight, sweetheart? I asked casually, my voice light, almost teasing. Or is it because you're on antibiotics for gonorrhea from your little cruise? The table went dead silent. Someone coughed, nearly choking on their drink. Rachel's mother gasped, her fork clattering against her plate. Across from me, Rachel's face drained of color so fast I thought she might pass out right then and there. You, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't let her finish. Oh, don't act so shocked. It all makes sense now. You come back from your girls' trip, and suddenly you don't want to touch me. Then out of nowhere, mystery illness. But it's not the flu, is it, Rachel? I turned to her mother, who sat frozen, horror plastered across her face. Did she tell you she was sick? I asked, tilting my head. No. That's because she didn't want anyone knowing what kind of sick it was. Rachel shot up from her chair so fast it nearly toppled over. You are out of your mind, she hissed, voice shaking. But it wasn't anger. It was terror. And then, just as the tension in the room reached its breaking point, Chloe, my sweet, innocent little girl, looked up and asked, Daddy, are you talking about Uncle Scott? The world flipped upside down. My ears started ringing. The entire restaurant seemed to disappear, except for Chloe's wide, honest eyes staring up at me, completely unaware of the grenade she had just thrown into the room. Uncle Scott. Rachel's sister's husband. The man sitting 4 seats away from me. The same man who, at this exact moment, had gone completely still, his face frozen in sheer horror. My blood went ice cold. My vision narrowed, tunneling in on Rachel. She hadn't cheated with some random guy on a cruise. She hadn't found some faceless stranger in another city. She had betrayed me with him. Right under my nose. Right within my family. And the worst part? My daughter knew. The silence that followed Chloe's words wasn't just heavy. It was suffocating. No one moved. No one breathed. The soft jazz playing in the background suddenly felt like a cruel joke, a mocking soundtrack to the complete and utter collapse of my marriage. Rachel's face had shifted from pale to an ashen, sickly gray. Scott, the man I had trusted, the man who had sat at my dinner table, didn't even attempt to feign innocence. His entire body had gone rigid, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal searching for an escape. His wife, Michelle, Rachel's sister, sat motionless, staring at him, her expression blank, as if her mind refused to process the reality of what had just been said. And just like that, the perfect family dinner became the scene of a war I never saw coming. I turned to Chloe, my sweet, innocent little girl, still swinging her legs under the chair, completely unaware that she had just dropped an atomic bomb right in the middle of dinner. I forced my voice to stay calm, even though my heart pounded like a war drum. "Chloe, sweetheart," I said gently, "what do you mean?" Rachel moved so fast it barely registered. One moment, she was frozen in shock, the next, her hand clamped onto Chloe's arm. Not harshly, but firm, too firm. "Baby," she said, her voice high-pitched, wavering at the edges. "Let's not talk about silly things right now, okay? Just eat your pasta." Chloe blinked up at her, clearly puzzled by the sudden urgency in her mother's tone. "But, Mommy," she said, her little voice full of confusion, "you told me not to tell Daddy about Uncle Scott because it would make him sad." And just like that, the last puzzle piece clicked into place. The table exploded into chaos. Michelle shot up from her chair, knocking over her wine glass in the process. "What the hell is she talking about?" she barked, her voice razor-sharp, cutting through the noise. Her eyes locked onto her husband. "Scott." Scott's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His throat bobbed, lips trembled, but no words formed. He had nothing. Nothing. Rachel was already scrambling for control. Chloe's confused, she practically shrieked, her voice cracking as she reached for our daughter. "She doesn't know what she's saying. She's just a kid." Chloe shrank back, her small shoulders curling inward as her wide eyes darted between her mother and me. She could tell now, something was very, very wrong. Rachel spun toward me, desperation wild in her eyes. "You're seriously going to believe a child over me?" she spat, her voice thick with venom. I exhaled slowly, controlled. Then I stood. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, slicing through the pandemonium like a knife. The whole table flinched. Scott finally tried to speak. "Listen, man, I didn't let him finish." My fist met his face with a crack, sending him flying out of his chair and crashing onto the ground. The entire restaurant gasped. Forks clattered onto plates. Glasses tipped over. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted. Michelle was wailing. Rachel was shrieking something, but I barely heard her. My blood roared in my ears as I stood over Scott, watching crimson drip from his nose. He didn't get up. He just lay there, stunned, trembling, looking up at me like the pathetic coward he was, like a man who knew he deserved everything coming to him. Rachel lunged at me, nails digging into my arm as she tried to shove me back. "Are you insane?" she shrieked, her voice raw with something I couldn't quite place. Was it fear? Guilt? Or just pure rage that she had been caught? "You're acting like a damn psycho in front of our daughter." I turned my head, slowly, locking eyes with her. My voice was eerily calm when I spoke. "Don't you dare talk to me about Chloe," I said, each word measured, deliberate. "Not after you used her to cover up your filthy little secret." Rachel sucked in a sharp breath. And for the first time since this all began, I saw it, genuine fear flickering across her face. Good. Scott was still sprawled on the floor, groaning, blood smeared beneath his nose. No one moved to help him, not even his wife. Michelle stood motionless, her hands clenched into trembling fists, her face a twisted mask of devastation and shock. Rachel grabbed my arm again, this time harder, her nails biting into my skin. "We're leaving," she hissed under her breath. I ripped my arm free so fast she staggered back a step. My voice came out low, steady, final. You don't get to tell me what to do. I met her wild, panicked eyes. Not anymore. Chloe was crying now, her small hands gripping the edge of the table, her gaze darting between us, trying to make sense of why her entire world was suddenly coming apart at the seams. And that was the only thing that made me hesitate. The only reason I didn't flip the damn table over and burn everything to the ground right then and there. Rachel saw that flicker of hesitation and seized the moment. Look at what you're doing, she snapped, jabbing a finger toward Chloe like she was nothing more than a prop in her desperate performance. You're scaring her. This is all your fault. I let out a sharp laugh, dry, bitter, completely devoid of humor. It felt foreign coming from my own throat. My fault? I echoed, shaking my head. You actually have the audacity to stand here and paint me as the villain? Rachel's eyes burned with something dark, something twisted and ugly. You don't even know what you're talking about, she spat, her voice tinged with desperation. You're making wild accusations. You have no proof. Then Chloe, my sweet little girl, sniffled and tugged at Rachel's sleeve. Mommy, she whimpered, her voice small but clear, you said you loved Uncle Scott. Silence. A silence so thick it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Michelle sucked in a sharp breath, as if she had just taken a punch straight to the gut. Scott clamped his eyes shut, bracing for impact like a man awaiting execution. My mother reached for my father's arm, her lips pressed into a thin, horrified line. And Rachel. Rachel looked like she wished the ground would swallow her whole. You what? Michelle finally managed to choke out, her voice cracking like shattered glass. Rachel spun toward Chloe so fast I thought she might grab her, maybe even shake her. Chloe, stop, she snapped, her words like a whip. You don't know what you're saying. Chloe shrank back, her little face streaked with tears, her tiny frame trembling. That was it. That was the moment I stepped between them, planting myself like an immovable wall. Rachel's hands clenched into fists, but she didn't dare push past me. I looked down at my daughter, reached out, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. It's okay, baby, I murmured, keeping my voice soft. You didn't do anything wrong. Then, slowly, I lifted my head and locked eyes with Rachel. But she did. Rachel's breath hitched. Her chest rose and fell in jagged, frantic movements. This isn't. Shut up. Michelle's voice sliced through the air, trembling with barely contained fury. Just shut the hell up. Scott had finally managed to pull himself off the ground, but he wasn't saying a word. He didn't bother. He knew there was no coming back from this. He knew it was over. I turned to him, my stomach twisting with disgust. How long? He swallowed hard. Man, How long? I repeated, my voice steel. Scott hesitated, but Rachel beat him to it. 3 years, she blurted out. The entire restaurant seemed to tilt. 3 years. The words hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. My vision blurred at the edges. My pulse pounded so violently I could feel it in my skull. My fingers curled so tightly into my palms that my nails dug into my skin. 3 goddamn years. For 3 years, I had slept beside her. Trusted her. Loved her. Built a life with her. And the whole time, she had been. Something inside me fractured. I didn't speak. I didn't even look at her. I just turned on my heel, scooped Chloe into my arms, and walked out of that restaurant. Rachel screamed my name, but I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't even glance back. She was still screaming when I pushed open the restaurant doors and stepped into the cold night air, Chloe clinging to my neck, her tiny fingers trembling against my skin. The moment the doors slammed shut behind us, her sobs softened into broken little hiccups against my shoulder. I had to hold it together. For her. I carried her to the car, my body moving on autopilot while my mind reeled, struggling to process the sheer magnitude of what had just unfolded. 3 years. 3 years of deception. 3 years of her crawling into my bed after being with him. 3 years of looking me in the eye, smiling, laughing, whispering that she loved me, while sneaking around with Scott behind my back. I buckled Chloe into her car seat, smoothing damp curls away from her tear-streaked face. She sniffled, her big, searching eyes locking onto mine with a question that shattered whatever was left of my heart. "Daddy, are you mad at me? Jesus Christ." I cupped her tiny face, shaking my head. "No, sweetheart. Never." My voice was tight, raw. "You did nothing wrong." She hesitated, uncertainty flickering across her face. "Mommy said it was a secret." "Of course she did." I forced a smile, even though my hands were still trembling. "Sometimes grown-ups keep secrets they shouldn't," I said carefully. "But you don't have to worry about that, okay? I promise." She nodded slowly, but I could tell she wasn't fully convinced. I kissed her forehead, shut the door, and leaned against the car for a second, pressing my fists against my temples, trying to breathe. Trying to keep the rage from consuming me whole. My entire body felt like a live wire, buzzing with so much anger I thought I might combust right there in the parking lot. Then the restaurant doors flew open. And there she was. Rachel. Her heels clicked furiously against the pavement as she stormed toward me, her face flushed, eyes wild with something caught between fury and desperation. "You don't get to just walk away from me," she hissed, jabbing a perfectly manicured finger into my chest. "You humiliated me in front of my entire family. Do you even realize what you just did?" I exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes right before a storm hits. "What I did?" I repeated, tilting my head. "Are you seriously standing here acting like I'm the problem?" "You lost your damn mind in there," she snapped. "You hit Scott. You caused a scene in a public place. You cheated on me for 3 years," I cut her off, my voice so cold it could have frozen the air between us. "With your sister's husband." She flinched. For the first time since this nightmare began, she had no quick excuse, no fake tears, no manipulative spin to throw at me. Just a brief flicker of actual shame. But it didn't last. Her expression twisted into something sharp and cruel. "Oh, don't act like you were some perfect husband," she sneered. "You got boring, okay? You stopped trying. You buried yourself in work and barely even looked at me anymore." I stared at her, stunned, not because of what she said, but because she actually believed that justified it. I took a slow step forward, lowering my voice to something just above a whisper, making sure only she could hear me. "So, instead of talking to me like an adult, instead of putting in effort like a decent human being, you spread your legs for Scott?" Her nostrils flared. "Don't you dare talk to me like that." I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. "Why?" "Because you don't like how it sounds when I say it out loud. Because it makes you feel dirty. Cheap." I leaned in just enough for her to have to tilt her head up to meet my gaze. "Good. You should." Her hand flew before I even saw it coming. A slap, hard and sharp, cracked against my face. My head snapped to the side, pain stinging my cheek, but I barely felt it. I just smiled. Slow. Cold. Satisfied. "That's the best you've got?" I murmured. "Pathetic." Her breath hitched. And she knew. She knew I was done. Really done. Her mouth opened, like she was about to say something, maybe to beg, maybe to curse me out again, but before she could get a word out, another voice sliced through the night air. "Rachel." We both turned. "Michelle." She stood in the parking lot, fists clenched at her sides, face streaked with dried tears. And behind her, lurking near the restaurant doors like a man contemplating whether to run or stay and take his punishment, was Scott, his nose still smeared with blood, his expression pure terror. I smiled wider. Because I knew, right then and there, this wasn't over. Not even close. Michelle walked toward us, slow and deliberate, her face twisted into something I had never seen before. Pure, unfiltered hatred. The grief, the shock, those were gone. Whatever had broken inside her had been replaced with something much darker. This wasn't a devastated wife standing in front of me. This was a woman ready to burn everything to the ground. Rachel stiffened beside me. Michelle, Shut up. Rachel's mouth clamped shut. Michelle didn't even glance at her. Her eyes were locked on Scott, who stood frozen near the doorway, his body rigid, his gaze darting around like a cornered animal. 3 years, she said, her voice eerily calm. 3 years, you son of a... Scott swallowed hard. Beck, Who started it? She demanded, taking another step forward. Who made the first move? Scott hesitated. Then his eyes flickered toward Rachel. Michelle saw it. And that was all she needed. She lunged. Scott barely had time to react before Michelle's palm cracked against his already broken nose. The sound echoed through the parking lot, sharp as a gunshot. Blood splattered across his shirt as his head snapped sideways. He stumbled, blinking in shock. But Michelle wasn't done. She grabbed the front of his shirt and yanked him toward her. You think you're a man? She spat, her voice trembling with rage. Sneaking around like a damn rat behind my back. Sleeping with my sister. Around our kids. Scott wrenched against her grip. Michelle, stop. She shoved him so hard he lost his balance and crashed onto the pavement. And I just stood there, watching, because for the first time in a long time, I knew justice was finally being served. Rachel gasped, eyes wide with panic. Michelle, stop it. This is insane. Michelle spun around so fast that Rachel instinctively stumbled back a step. Insane? She echoed, letting out a sharp, bitter laugh. Oh, sweetheart, I'm just getting started. Rachel tried to summon that usual composed, let's be reasonable expression, but it wasn't working. Her hands were shaking. Listen, I know this looks bad, but we can talk about it. We don't have to. Oh, now you want to talk. Michelle's voice was like a razor slicing through the night air. Did you talk to me before you started screwing my husband? Did you sit me down for a little heart-to-heart before you dragged my daughter into your disgusting secret? Rachel's face twitched. It's not like that. Michelle let out a sharp, humorless bark of laughter. Not like that? Then enlighten me, Rachel. Tell me what it's like. She spread her arms wide, daring her to explain. Go on, tell me how you smiled in my face at every family holiday, every birthday, every Sunday brunch, while you were screwing my husband behind my back. Rachel's breathing had turned shallow, frantic. Her gaze darted between me and Michelle, like she was finally realizing, for the first time, that there was no talking her way out of this. No manipulations. No gaslighting. She was cornered. Scott groaned from the ground, dabbing at the blood smeared across his mouth. Michelle, please. She turned on him so fast he flinched. Shut up. That's when Michelle reached into her pocket and pulled something out. A phone. And she was smiling. Rachel froze, her entire body going rigid. What is that? Michelle tilted her head slightly, feigning innocence. Oh, this? She held up the phone, eyes gleaming. Just a little insurance. Rachel's skin turned ghostly pale. Michelle, what did you do? I took a step closer, curiosity piqued. Michelle. She met my gaze, and for the first time, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. There was something almost gleeful in her expression, something that said she had been waiting for this moment. Then she turned the phone toward me. And pressed play. Rachel's voice crackled through the speaker. I don't even feel guilty anymore. A breathless, giddy little laugh. I mean, what he doesn't know won't hurt him, right? The world tilted. Rachel's face crumpled. Oh my God. Scott let out a strangled sound. Michelle, where did you? Shut up, she snapped, not even looking at him. The recording continued. I just. Scott knows me better. He listens. He makes me feel things I don't feel with. I didn't hear the rest. I ripped the phone from Michelle's hands and hurled it against the pavement. It shattered on impact. Rachel gasped, but I didn't care. I turned to her, my entire body shaking with rage. You recorded yourself? Her lips trembled. I didn't know. Michelle smirked. No, but I did. Rachel sucked in a sharp breath, pure horror flashing across her face. You, oh my God. You. Oh, don't look so shocked, Michelle sneered. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't hear the excuses, the lies? The way Scott conveniently worked late the same nights you did? She took a slow step forward, her voice dipping to something almost dangerous. I've known for months. Rachel made a choked noise. What? Michelle crossed her arms, staring her down. I was just waiting for the right moment. Then she glanced at me. And this felt like the right moment. For the first time that night, Rachel looked like she might actually break. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I took a step forward, my voice dropping to something low and lethal. You disgust me. The words felt like acid in my mouth. Every single thing about you, your words, your smiles, your kisses, it was all a lie. Rachel's eyes flooded with tears. I never wanted to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh. But you did. Silence. A long, suffocating silence. Then finally, I exhaled. I turned to Michelle. Do you and the kids have somewhere to stay? Michelle hesitated, then gave a stiff nod. My parents' house. I nodded back. Good. Then, without another word, I walked to my car, yanked the door open, and climbed in. Rachel rushed forward, slamming both palms against the window. We need to talk. I stared at her through the glass. And then, slowly, deliberately, I reached for the lock. And clicked it. Rachel's face twisted. Don't do this. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. She pounded the glass, eyes wild with panic. You can't just leave me. I met her gaze one last time. Then I pulled out of the parking lot and left her standing there, alone in the cold. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless. Streetlights flashed by in a blur, their glow casting long, ghostly shadows across the pavement. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but I couldn't make myself loosen them. Not yet. Not while my mind kept replaying every second of the last hour like some sick horror movie I couldn't shut off. In the back seat, Chloe had finally stopped crying. Now, she lay curled up against her stuffed bunny, her small chest rising and falling in uneven little breaths. Every so often, I glanced at her through the rearview mirror, my heart clenching at the sight of her tiny fingers gripping the worn fabric like it was the only thing holding her together. I had to be strong for her. But Jesus Christ. I felt like I was unraveling. 3 years. 3 years of deception. 3 years of her slipping into my bed after being with him. 3 years of looking me straight in the eye, smiling, laughing, telling me she loved me, all while screwing Scott behind my back. My grip on the wheel tightened. When the red light ahead forced me to slam the brakes, I barely felt it. Rachel's face was still burned into my mind, the sheer panic when Michelle played that recording. The way her voice had sounded so casual, so effortless, like it was just another conversation. Like none of it mattered. Like I didn't matter. I forced myself to take a slow, controlled breath. Losing it now wouldn't fix anything. And I had more important things to focus on than my own rage. I had Chloe. Pulling into the driveway, I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the house. My house. The one I built for my family. The one Rachel had turned into a lie. No. Not tonight. Not with Chloe watching. I unbuckled my seatbelt, climbed out, and gently lifted her from the back seat. She stirred slightly, mumbling sleepily against my shoulder as I carried her inside. The second I stepped through the door, something felt off. The house was different. Wrong. It smelled like Rachel's perfume, like the home I thought I had. I didn't look at our bedroom. I didn't even glance at it. Instead, I carried Chloe to her room, tucking her in with careful hands. She blinked up at me, heavy-lidded with exhaustion but still brimming with quiet worry. "Are you mad at Mommy?" she whispered. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Just go to sleep, baby." She hesitated, then gave a small nod and curled beneath the blanket. "Love you, Daddy." I leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Love you too." When I stepped out of her room and shut the door behind me, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. And that's when I felt it. A shift in the air. A presence. I turned. Rachel stood in the hallway. My blood ran cold. She had changed out of her dress, now wearing sweatpants and one of my old t-shirts, like slipping into some worn-out version of her role as a loving wife would erase everything she'd done. It wouldn't. She had no idea that I was already past the point of no return. She took a cautious step forward. "Can we talk?" I stared at her, the woman I had once loved. The woman who had destroyed me. Then, without a word, I turned around and walked away. Rachel's voice cracked. "You can't just ignore me forever." I didn't answer. Because soon, she'd realize, she didn't have forever. Rachel never handled being ignored well. She trailed after me, her bare feet padding across the floor, her voice rising with every step. "So that's it? You're just going to shut me out after everything we've been through?" I let out a slow, measured breath and kept walking. "I made a mistake, okay?" Her voice wavered, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just another act. "I know I screwed up, but you can't just throw away 10 years of marriage over this." I stepped into the living room, grabbed the nearest blanket, and tossed it onto the couch. Rachel's face twisted in disbelief. "Seriously?" For the first time since we walked into the house, I turned to look at her. "You're sleeping here tonight?" Her eyes flashed with panic. "You can't be serious." I met her gaze, my voice calm, steady, final. "You don't get to tell me what I can and can't do. Not anymore." She flinched but recovered quickly. "You're being dramatic." That made me laugh, a slow, bitter chuckle, completely devoid of humor. "Dramatic?" I took a slow, deliberate step forward. For the first time that night, she was the one retreating. "You cheated on me for 3 years, Rachel." 3. With Scott. My own brother-in-law. "And now that the truth is out, you have the audacity to act like I'm the one overreacting." Her nostrils flared. "It wasn't just me." I tilted my head, eyes narrowing. "Oh, so now you're blaming him?" She threw up her hands. "Yes. It's not like I planned this, okay? One night, it just happened. And then, I don't know, I felt alive again. He made me feel wanted. Like I was more than just someone's wife and someone's mother." My jaw clenched. "And that makes it okay?" Tears welled up in her eyes. I'm trying here, okay? I love you. Something inside me snapped. No, you don't, I said, my voice cold and final. You love what I gave you. You love the comfort. The stability. The fact that I was the one who took care of you while you ran around behind my back. You love that I was too damn trusting, too blind to see what was right in front of me. I shook my head, exhaling sharply. But me? You don't love me, Rachel. A broken sob ripped from her throat. I don't want to lose you. I stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Then, slowly, I nodded. You already did. Her breath caught, a single, hitched inhale. I turned away, heading for the bedroom. Wait, she pleaded, reaching for my arm. Please, just. I yanked free before she could latch on. Go to sleep, Rachel. She froze, her lips parting as if she wanted to argue. But she didn't. I stepped into the bedroom and shut the door behind me. She didn't follow this time. Good. The second I was alone, the weight of it all crashed over me. The room felt suffocating. The bed. The pillows. The blankets. Everything smelled like her. Like the woman who had just stood in front of me, crying, begging, trying to put the pieces back together, when she was the one who shattered them in the first place. I couldn't do it. I couldn't sleep in that bed. Not when I knew that for the past 3 years, she had laid beside me while thinking about him. I turned around, walked back out, and grabbed my keys from the counter. Rachel was still in the living room, curled up on the couch, her arms wrapped around herself like she was the victim in all of this. Her head snapped up when she saw me. Where are you going? I didn't answer. Don't you dare leave, she said, her voice rising. We need to talk. I walked to the door. God damn it, talk to me. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I paused, then slowly turned my head to look at her. You want to talk? My voice was eerily calm. Fine. Let's talk. Let's talk about how you let our daughter be part of your disgusting little secret. Let's talk about how you smiled at every family event like nothing was happening. Let's talk about how you made a mockery of me in front of everyone. Rachel's face crumpled. I didn't. I didn't let her finish. You don't get to cry, Rachel. You don't get to be the one who's hurt. Her lips trembled. I never wanted to hurt you. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped my throat. And yet, here we are. She opened her mouth, maybe to defend herself, maybe to throw out another excuse, but I didn't care. I turned. Walked out the door. And slammed it behind me. The cold air hit me like a slap, sharp and biting, but I welcomed it. I needed it. I needed something to anchor me, something to pull me away from the suffocating rage burning inside my chest. I climbed into the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I forced my breathing to slow. I could fix this. Not the marriage. Not her. But my life. My future. Because for the first time in 3 years, I finally saw everything clearly. This wasn't a setback. It was an escape. And I was never looking back.